Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm so excited for our conversation today. I would love to have our guest Dax introduce yourself, tell us about who you are and what you do in the events industry.
Hi, Dax Callner. I've been in the events industry since, drumroll, 1999. It's been a long time. If you're watching this whenever, it's now 2025. And I started my career in the US and worked there for a long time. I'm living in England now. I started in the agency world, Jack Morton Worldwide. And then I moved on to other agencies and was always working in agencies. Actually, I've always worked in agencies in this industry. I started my career as a digital producer, weirdly, but then I got into strategy, and strategy really suits me. And I am a strategist. And part of that is because I love figuring problems out. And the other part of it is I love telling people what to do, which is maybe not ideal in my personal life, but really works pretty well as a strategist. I'm also very interested in measurement. And I founded an association called the Experiential Marketing Measurement Coalition in 2018. And that's a not-for-profit industry association focused on measurement. So we could talk more about that if you'd like, but that's one of my passion points. I left the agency world, or I left the other agency world about 2 years ago and started my own practice. Happily, I'm called DAC Strategy, and I operate and work with a bunch of freelancers, basically, as a consultant to clients directly and through agencies to help them have more strategic, more impactful events and experiences. And so that's kind of my day to day. That's my world.
Amazing. I love the idea of strategy just being telling people what to do because
I
that's
know.
probably why we all enjoy strategy, but no one says it like that.
Yeah, I'm a little too candid sometimes, but
No, that's perfect. I mean, that's probably what makes you a good strategist because if
and
you're
gets me in
not very,
trouble.
yeah, if you're not candid though, that's how you get into things of like, oh, this event is not good, not because the
Yeah,
experience is bad, but because there's no strategy behind it and no one wanted to say
yeah.
it and they were just going through the motions, right?
I mean,
So,
I on that point, like I think of strategists hopefully as truth tellers,
hmm
and I hope that's what people pay us to do. Anyone can hire an agency, for example, and have an account person say yes to everything and how great everything is. We do need somebody who says, well, wait a second, hold on, this is good, this isn't so good. And that's where improvement and, getting better at everything comes from. And we'll talk about data also, but the strategist comes with experience. I often say to people like, yes, I love measurement and data, but I also have lots and lots and lots of experience. And so I do have some credibility and historical evidence to support when I make a recommendation. Sorry to keep talking, but I got in
no,
big trouble early in my career when I told a client what they should do. And they said, well, what's your evidence? And I had nothing. I had zero. And I was put on the spot. And this is like a Fortune 100 company. And so I learned big time from that experience that I need to have evidence to support my recommendation. I can't just make the recommendation because I feel like it. I need to have the support. And that support can be data evidence, insight gathering, research. It can be measurement data, and it can be my experience. Like I have learned now that my experience is a credible source of why are you recommending this?
yeah, absolutely. I think that it's so true. I had a call yesterday with an entrepreneur who's running an event. It's an event that she's run in the past, and we met at a networking event, and she said, "I think I need to talk to someone in more detail about what I'm doing with this event, what the future of this event looks like." And I was talking to her about the vision of it and through the conversation and some experience and also some understanding of like logistics and legal ramifications of those logistics, she was like, "Oh, I need to rethink how I'm doing this and promoting this," right? And so sometimes it's the experience of, hey, you probably don't know that this is a thing because why would you? And that's what you pay an event strategist to do, right? You pay us to know the thing. But also that experience of, okay, yes, we have tried running an event where we do a 6 a.m. run in October, but nobody comes because it's pitch black out, right? And I know you really want to have that wellness component, but is this the right wellness component for you?
Yeah, I mean, exactly right. So when I think of the role of the strategist, it is to increase the odds of success of the project.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is my job. I always think of my job as making sure I do everything I can to make sure the project and the client is successful. And who doesn't want that type of advocacy in their corner? It's not about me. It's not even about making money for me. It's about how do I make sure they make money or they get across their brand attributes or they deliver value to attendees. And so if I'm hardcore focused on that, that is almost always a win. And I say the odds of success because we know in the events world, so much can go wrong, so many things, there's so many factors. All I
Sure.
can do is increase the odds. I cannot guarantee success, but hopefully I increase them and more success happens as a result.
Yeah, exactly. Like anyone who is expecting a perfect event is, I mean, they've either never done an event before or like, or are just naive, right?
Yeah, or their expectations are out of whack. And so I have found sometimes like let's say take a trade show exhibit, for example. The client may say, "Well, we want 1,000 qualified leads," and I will know that that's just not possible. And
Yeah.
so let's reframe what success looks like, and let's get to something a target that you can actually achieve, and then I will help you achieve that target. But we have to have reasonable and achievable targets in the first place.
Yeah, and I had this conversation with an exec once when we were trying to determine metrics and goals for an event. And it was an event that we hadn't been to before. We knew the demographic, though. We knew about how many people they were expecting. And, he kind of threw out a number, and I said, okay, except we're sending 4 people. They can each talk to 5, 6 people in an hour if they're like really hustling, really actually connecting with folks. And there's, 10 hours of trade show. So do that math. So how do you get to 1,000 when you really only have time to talk to, and my math is not going to be correct, but like 100 people, right? Like
Right.
you have to set those reasonable expectations, right? Like having 5,000 people versus 20,000 people at a show is not really necessarily going to change the number of leads you're able to collect because you're still like, unless you have some really amazing way that people are just giving you leads at your booth without actually talking to them, which they're not, right? Everyone
Right.
thinks that someone's going to fill out a QR form and someone's going to like leave their business. They're not doing any of those things, right? So how are you
Yeah.
actually setting yourself up for measurement and targets that make sense to what you are resourcing the event to?
Yeah. Let's talk about leads though for a second, because
Yeah.
this is a fascinating topic that I often am challenged by. First of all, what is a lead?
Mm-hmm.
I think, when I think of what a lead is, I think of it's an individual who can make or influence a purchase decision. It's not a badge scan.
Yep.
And so a lead has to be able to make or influence a purchase decision. Otherwise, they don't need sales follow up because they can't do anything with, they can't actually make the purchase or influence a purchase. So I think, first of all, in our industry, we need to be clear with what we mean when we say lead versus, let's call it, a contact.
Yep.
I think if you're going for badge scans, you can do contacts. You can have a contact goal and you can have a lead goal. And then I think secondly is there are different philosophies when it comes to so-called leads. I worked with a technology client. I think this is in the early 2000s or mid 2000s. And their whole exhibit was focused on getting as many badge scans as possible. Didn't matter if somebody spent 10 seconds as long as they got their data. And
Yep.
then they would follow up later and try to qualify who those people were and see if they were actually leads or just contacts. That is one approach. And I will say to a client, if you want 10,000 badge scans, let's just give away $10,000 as a sweepstakes.
Right.
And everyone who scans their badge gets an access to that, one entry in the sweepstakes. I'll get you 10,000. I mean, that's easy. I've done nothing to impact your brand, nothing to attract a certain quality of audience, but I've gotten you those badge scans. The other philosophy, and the one that I tend to ascribe to, is attraction of qualified leads or leads. Rather than the raw number of scans, how do we make sure that the experience is designed to attract the right people into it? That makes a much more useful time for booth staff who can have a conversation with someone who's genuinely interested in the product or is an existing customer. That's the other thing about leads is sometimes when you just have a lead goal and a current customer comes in, you're like, I'm not that interested in talking to you because you're not a prospect. And so I do think we need to consider what is that quality audience? And in my view, we need to look at how do we attract that and then determine what is the right number of qualified prospect leads that we want to come out of that experience.
Yeah,
That's how I
and
think of it.
the customers at the booth is an interesting challenge. And I know
Yeah.
my last company, we struggled with it because, for budget reasons, they wanted to reduce the number of staff going to shows, so they cut back on sending the customer success folks. Well, the result was that customers would come by the booth, couldn't get a question answered because it was usually too technical or too, like, in the weeds that sales can't answer, and sales doesn't want to talk to them. And I don't blame them, right? Like, sales
Not
gets
their
no
job.
benefit from talking to a customer.
Yeah.
So not like our smaller shows where it's like a tabletop booth, but if we had like a 20 by 30, we had at least one or two customer people, so that, and even if they had to wait to talk to that person, it at
Mm,
least showed that, one, we still cared about you as a customer after we've sold to you, right? Because that was also feedback I got. We did a prospect dinner, and prospects had been the year before, became customers, and they're like, oh, so now you don't take us to dinner anymore, right? Like,
yeah.
oh, now we're not as useful to you, because, and so we ended up doing a dinner for prospects and a
Yeah.
dinner for clients, right? So, also having a plan around how you're going to manage customers at the event, because presumably you're
For
going to have
sure.
some there, and how do you measure success with them as well, right? Because
Absolutely.
are you able to solve a problem? Are you able to get them to use something more because, oh, they didn't know about this feature, and then you've unlocked, the more stickiness. And I'm coming from the tech world, so like that's, it's all about getting them to use the product and getting it sticky into their environment.
Yeah. Well, a few quick stories. One is I worked with a financial services brand in a similar situation. They had an exhibit that was designed at acquisition, new customer acquisition,
Yep.
and the manager of the exhibit's only goal was how many new leads or new acquisitions they would get into the stand. And a new customer would come in, and I mean, an existing customer would come in, and I mean, literally someone who would spend millions with them,
Yep.
and they would get a handshake, a thank you, and goodbye, get out of here, because
Yeah.
that was not what that person was evaluated on, and they would be left with a bad impression. So now
Yeah.
you're putting at risk millions of dollars of revenue to try and get small incremental revenue off of new customers. That just seems insane. The second thing I might say is when I do planning for trade show exhibits on this topic, I look at what is the market share of the company in that show.
Yeah.
So, for example, like if you have a major market share, then you can expect a lot of existing customers to come into your exhibit, and you need to make sure you're accommodating those customers. If you have no market share or you're a challenger brand, then you can focus on it primarily as a prospecting experience. So it isn't the same across all events.
For
And
sure.
then the final thing I'll say is I'm actually working on a consumer measurement of a consumer activation right now, a major brand. I don't even want to say the category because I don't want to give anything away, but it's a major brand in US. This was a US activation at a big consumer event. I'm just looking at the data now, and it's very interesting because 36% of people who came to the activation were existing customers of this brand, where the brand's market share is only 10%. And so that's fascinating. So now what do we do with that data? So for future events, I'm suggesting what do we need to do to make sure if we're attracting existing customers that we're giving them extra special love and attention in this experience. And
Yeah.
I think in a way, the experience itself is attracting existing customers just because people are like, oh, I want to see what those guys are doing. I'm a customer of theirs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are
Yeah.
some quick stories and thoughts.
Yeah, and it is often an afterthought, right? Because marketing is focused, and some companies have a customer marketing person, but so many don't, right? Everyone's focused on new leads, new leads, new leads, but we all know the most effective way and the cheapest way is to retain the customers and make them happy.
Yeah, or at least know that the most expensive thing to do is lose a customer for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me more about, the association around measurement. Like, what is it that you're doing there? How is it helping, event marketers and other planners, one, make their lives easier, two, sell the story and the strategy to executives?
Right. Thank you. It's a not-for-profit, so I am pitching it, but I make no money from it, just so everyone knows. However, if you are interested, the website is eventmeasurement.org. It's a US-based not-for-profit industry association explicitly focused on better measurement in our industry. There's a lot of people talking about measurement, but we're the only, as far as I know, the only industry body that this is all we do. We were really focused on improving our industry through better data, standards of measurement, and so we publish guidance to the industry. We promote that guidance. We are constantly thinking of new ways and new things to say. We're always evaluating new approaches, but we're also trying to establish global standards of measurement, ultimately so that we can all as an industry have some shared benchmarks. So for example, like if I were to say going to technology, if I were going to a technology trade show, I would want to know what's the benchmark for leads in a 20 by 40. That would be awesome if I knew that going in, then I could kind of plan that and I could compare my results against the benchmark. Those types of data sets don't exist. They exist in pockets.
Mm-hmm.
Some companies hold on to it and like they use it with their clients. I am much more like open book. Let's get this data. Let's get these benchmarks out there. But we do need some standardization in order to get to those benchmarks. And so that's sort of the long journey of this group. And anyone who geeks out on event measurement should check it out because we have the wonkiest conversations, but I love it, the most fun. We have one today. We have a monthly forum where anyone can bring any topic, any question, and we just talk about it as a group and share knowledge and stuff without getting into confidential stuff. And so it's really for people who either want to grow their skills in this area or want to improve our industry, which is really where I'm coming from. I believe that if the industry does better measurement, it'll make our industry better, healthier, able to defend our budgets when we know that events are often looked at with a lot of scrutiny about why are we spending all this money. And it will help us make better events because we're using real data and insight to make improvements. So I'm really obviously passionate about this topic.
Well, and you're right that it's hard to find that data, and it's often put out. Like I remember I was trying to find data on event app uptake. So how for a user conference or trade show, how many people typically download the app? Because we had really high uptake on ours. At least we thought we did. But we were like, but I don't know what industry standard is. And
Exactly.
I think I found a stat like on an event tech website that I'm like, this is the best I've got to
Yeah.
compare, right? And so, measuring one, are we performing as well or as poorly as we think, right? Because sometimes you think, oh, we're not doing that well, and it's like, oh, actually, we're above the industry standard, but it is very hard. And like you said, it's usually in pockets and usually done by event tech companies or,
Yeah.
people who are like, obviously, we all have a benefit to that using that data and having that data properly. But, the event tech companies or other companies that are putting it out usually they're trying to sell you something, right? Which
Well,
I
actually, yeah,
get.
let me actually tell you about something that's driving me crazy right now in our industry, and it's tied to event tech companies. And I'm a fan of event tech.
Yep,
I obviously we have to use technology.
yep.
They're doing electrical work on my street. So if there's drilling in the
I
background, that
cannot
is
hear
what you're
anything.
hearing.
We're
Okay,
good. We're
good.
good.
Yes. So I was just having this conversation with a company that uses scanners to track people's movement through an environment.
Hmm.
And they heavily lean in on what they call dwell time or how much time people spend. And I said to them, I need you to prove to me that the more time someone spends, the more likely they are to buy.
Hmm.
And they didn't have that data because their technology obviously can't draw those correlations. And I understand that that's where they're coming from an event tech perspective. But as a measurement person, it doesn't matter to me necessarily that someone spends half an hour versus 20 minutes or 10 minutes in an exhibit. What I need to know is how did that impact their brand perception? How did that impact their likelihood to buy? And so my suggestion to any event tech company that's watching this is do some testing. Try to find those correlations. Do some testing with a mock audience to understand how time spent or how optimal time spent actually impacts these changes in perception and behavior. I think the tech companies that do that analysis will win. Like that's the missing component. And as a measurement guy, I, dwell time doesn't mean anything to me. Like I can report how much time somebody spent, but I can't ascribe any meaning to that. I have
Yeah.
nothing, I don't, and so what I've been doing lately actually is trying to work on when designing experiences, what is the optimal time? You said earlier, like if we're talking about like exhibit staff trying to have a conversation with a customer or a visitor to the stand,
Yeah.
what's the optimal amount of time? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 7 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? And let's measure whether or not we met that optimal target,
Right.
that time target. Because more time, especially in exhibiting, if customer is dominating your staff for an hour for one person, you're not getting the throughput that you might want out of that.
Yeah.
And so this is one of those bugaboos that's making me nuts right now.
Yeah, like the dwell time is definitely I again, we don't have the data to prove it, but I think there is like a law of diminishing returns, right? Like there is
Definitely.
kind of that peak time, but if I see even a prospect in the booth for an hour, I'm like this means that this sales rep has not been able to talk to at least four or five other people,
Yeah.
right? Like or even three people, right? And it's taking up too much of their time, and it's tough because the salesperson feels like, gut feels that the longer that person's there and the more questions they're asking, the more likely they are to buy. But that's not necessarily true, right? Like they may just be a tire kicker. Maybe they're not even the person that can make the decision, right?
Exactly.
You don't know, and you've now spent all this time where you could have been getting people through, right? Like, and that's why, like, I've talked to executives about getting your booth staff like really well trained on how to have a great conversation and to politely end the conversation and to
Yeah.
move to the end. Like we can't cover that right now, but I'd love to set up a full demo where we can get into your nitty gritty, and I can really dive in, right? and
Yeah.
and making sure that you also have a plan for when they get back to the office, that those demos are booked if they're not even booked. Like, we had a lot of success booking demos on site. So saying, okay, let's pull up your calendar and see when you're available next week. Done, booked. And those people were showing up because they're it's warm, they remember, you're not losing when you go back to the office and who is this guy? What card is this? Right? Like it's a little bit more like it's a warmer connection.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is such a desperately needed area in the trade show industry. Is it, and we all know, or we know, you and I, that a great salesperson isn't necessarily a great booth staff salesperson or booth
Yep.
staff person. And I think part of it, as we said earlier, is to ascertain quickly, who am I talking to? Am I talking to someone who can make or influence a purchase decision? And so I think some of those conversation starters, tell me about yourself and what's in your business and what's your role like. Much better to have those introductory conversations before getting into, well, let me tell you about us and here's what
Yeah.
we sell and here's what we do. Like, get to know the person who's visiting the exhibit as quickly as you can so that you can customize the next steps after that. And if someone is not an influencer or purchase decision maker, they could be a tire kicker, as you say, then exit quickly and
Yeah.
politely and nicely. And if someone wants to have a very deep dive, as you've said, either let's schedule something where we can get into it later, or maybe there's another space in the exhibit where you can sit down with an SME and like have that deep conversation. And I'm going to move on to the next
Yeah.
prospect.
Yeah.
But it does come down to the right, not just training. Training is critical, but also selection. Like, who are the right personalities to have
Yeah.
in the space? Because again, it isn't always that amazing salesperson who's
Yeah.
great in that
And there are
environment.
some folks that are great at selling over the phone. Like there are great BDRs that
Yeah,
like can cold call like no one else. But you put them in the booth and they don't know how to bring people into the booth. They don't know how to, get through those conversations. Like you said, when
yeah,
you're cold calling, you already know who you're calling. Based on their title, you're probably making some assumptions about
yeah,
like what their role in the organization is. But when you got like someone coming up with a just a name and a company, you got to do a lot more pre-qualifying that you're not used to on the, like, if you're coming from calling, a list every day where you're just
Yeah.
running through it, right?
I did my first booth staff duty last year. I, with the EMMC, the Measurement Coalition, we had a booth at Event Marketer, an event in, no, sorry, Experiential Marketing Summit event in Vegas. And I worked the booth, which I have never done. And I am actually a natural introvert. I'm not
Right.
extroverted. I make myself do extroverted things,
Sure.
but it does not come naturally. And so if I'm sitting there in the booth, I wait for people to come up. I am not going to go proactively draw people
Yeah.
in. However, smartly, we hired somebody who was expert at that, starting that introductory conversation.
Yep.
So she was doing the intros, quickly get to know the person, and then giving them to me if they were worth having a deeper conversation with.
Yeah.
That was ideal because it just isn't my personality to say, hey, how you doing? Tell me about yourself. Like,
Yeah.
I cringe actually
Yeah.
at the thought, but she was superb at it and had no problem.
Yeah, it's amazing when you find the people that are good at it. Like, I used to, because I am extroverted, but it's still a skill to be able to, like, stop people, get them. Like, we had one guy that, like, we used to joke, like, he would just, like, follow people, right? And, like, not in, like, a really
Mm,
aggressive way, but just, like, all of a sudden he'd be walking beside you, you'd be talking to him, you're like, wait, how did I get into this? Right? And he did it so
hilarious.
naturally, and it's just like, it was a skill he had developed and just got really good at. And we used to send him to basically every show because he could get people through the booth and knew how to, like, close off the conversation too. Like, I
Yeah,
would never see him in an hour-long demo with anyone because he was like, okay, nope, we're gonna set it up, we'll talk to you next week, or we'll talk to you at the end of the week, and we'll get more of your team on the call and get the right people there. And he just knew how to do it seamlessly. So
nice.
it is quite a skill for sure.
Mm.
So we're coming up to time. I mean, I think you and I could definitely talk about spreadsheets and measurements and all of that amazing stuff. The boring part, that it's not really that boring, right? All day long. But why don't we wrap up with having you tell us where people can find you if they want to find out more about the nonprofit and how they can get involved.
Okay, if you want to find me, LinkedIn is the best place to find me, and I'm responsive to messages on LinkedIn, and then we can transfer to email as we need to. But it's just a great professional networking platform. I use it all the time. Dax Callner, and so easy to find. I think there's not a lot of, well, there are no other Dax Callners in the world.
There are no other Shenandoah Nicholsons on LinkedIn,
Exactly.
so
It's good to be one of a kind. And then, as I said earlier, the Measurement Coalition is at eventmeasurement.org, and you can just pop over there. You can send a note. You can join. It's not expensive to join. We keep the membership cost quite low. But yeah, I'd love to interact with anyone or check in with me if you think there's something to talk about.
perfect, amazing. Well, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure.